Welcome to Actuary Voices. I'm your host, David Nolan. In this edition, I'll be speaking with Linda Lankowski, who's the chairperson of the PBR Implementation Work Group. She'll be discussing the evolution of principle-based reserving, the upcoming PBR Bootcamp webinar series, and some opportunities she sees for the actuarial profession. Linda, welcome.
Thank you, David.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've been an actuary for a very long time. So I graduated college in 1983 with a degree in mathematics. And I was not going to become an actuary. My father thought that I should be an actuary because he was an insurance agent. What he knew about actuaries is that they were good at math, and he thought they made $1 million a year. I don't make anywhere near $1 million a year. I have made $1 million in my career, but not in a year. And I was having troubles finding a job, but my father knew a headhunter who found me an actuarial role, and I have been happily an actuary for much of my career.
That's great. And you are a staunch volunteer at the American Academy of Actuaries. Do you want to tell us how you got involved in that?
I've been volunteering with the Academy for 15 or so years, perhaps a little bit longer. I got started when we were talking about life settlements, and I was working for a company that was quite interested in the topic, and I was around people at the Academy who were interested in both learning more about the topic and trying to educate more people about life settlements. And so I started volunteering, and I was encouraged in my volunteer work to take on additional roles and actually take on leadership roles within these. And so I became chair of the Life Products Committee. I was vice chair of the Life Practice Council. I wound up being chair of the Actuarial Standards Board Life Committee and chair of a couple of ASOP task forces along the way. I had been a product person. I was doing a lot with reinsurance, and I was a product person, and suddenly found myself being an expert in a valuation topic of principle-based reserves. It seemed rather strange to me because I wanted to stay as far away from valuation as I could. And now my role is valuation actuary at RGA.
I see. You mentioned principle-based reserving and principle-based reserves. That's a pretty big topic nowadays. Do you want to tell us a little bit about where it came from, why it's important, and what it means for your average person?
Well, 1 million years ago, when I was a young actuary, reserves were very tabular. Products were quite simple because we were doing calculations mostly by hand. Computers were not a big deal. I was brought into a company that had one personal computer for the whole actuarial team, and we all took turns using it. It didn't even have a hard drive. So a lot of calculations were done by hand. But as computing powers grew, products became more complicated. We could start looking at more details related to underwriting practices as well. So you started having products that were universal life, and premiums were not required to be paid every single year the same way a whole life policy was. We started having multiple underwriting classifications. I remember smoker and non-smoker being a big deal back in the 1980s. And today, it's not just smoker and non-smoker. Today, it's are you super preferred or just plain preferred or standard risk? So when all of those things started coming together, there was a CSO table, the 1980 CSO table that was being used, and reserves were pretty conservative for some of these products. And there was a recognition that something should be done for that. And we came up with putting select and ultimate mortality together for that. And we wound up with deficiency reserves for a lot of products. And deficiency reserves seem to be, in some cases, larger than the base reserves. Not a good situation. And the regulators and the academy started working together to come up with a better solution that was more principle-based and would meet the needs of all these emerging product features that were coming out and emerging underwriting practices and all that. So the process probably started back in 2005 or so, and we finally got a law, that a new standard valuation law. The model law was written in 2009, and it started being adopted by states. It had to go through legislation for each of the states and be adopted, and that came out in 2012, and it's been worked on since then. By 2017, we hit critical mass, and companies could start adopting PBR. Along the way, there was this financial crisis in 2008, and variable annuity products were hit pretty hard. And regulators started trying to figure out what we were going to do about that. So part of the principles-based approach was taken specifically for variable annuities and turned into an actuarial guideline. So that was AG 43. And that could be implemented without having to open up all the laws within the states. AG 43 has now been implemented as part of the valuation manual, and all 50 states use the same valuation manual for their reserving process. We have life principle-based reserves, we have variable annuity principle-based reserves, and we're currently working on a fixed annuity principle-based reserve process. That one is still several years out before that will be implemented. But in the meantime, we have a valuation manual that all 50 states use. Prior to 2017, when the valuation manual started becoming adopted by all states, each state had to adopt its own valuation manual, and there were changes and variations between the states. It was, if you were a large multi-state company, it was rather difficult to maintain all the different rules for each of the different states. It was much easier now that we have a valuation manual that is nationwide. It really does help things in that respect. But it also means, because it is principle-based, that the actuary has a stronger role in setting reserves. It's not just a hand calculation of a single mortality number times a single discount rate. It is now much more that the actuary has to pay attention to: how are the assumptions being set? How is the model being governed? How are the controls being put in place? Who needs to be informed of all the things that are going on? It winds up being a much more actuarial process than it used to be when it was just a tabular calculation.
And do you see that as being significant progress, or is the extra work a burden?
Everything would be principle-based. And because I believe that as actuaries, we are really well governed. We have an actuarial standards board that sets ASOPs and standards of practice that we all live by. We pull them out, we read them, make sure that we're abiding by them. We have ADCD, the Actuarial Board for Counseling and Discipline, which will follow up and give us guidance if we need that related to how do we interpret some of those ASOPs, we wind up with a really good way of helping people understand the right way to do things. I believe that actuaries are trying their best to do the right things. They're not going off and saying, oh, I don't care whether we're going to pay benefits in 40 years. I want profits today. The actuaries are instead saying, I recognize that the public needs to have these benefits paid 40, 60, 80 years into the future. And so my company needs to stay solvent for that much time. It has to be profitable because otherwise, why would we have a company that is not profitable? So as actuaries, we're balancing profitability and strength and future needs and benefits getting paid. It's all about the consumer and all the stakeholders that get involved. The actuaries are trying their best to put all that together. I think that when we had tabular methodology instead of a principle-based methodology, the actuary didn't have that option. They had very strict protocols that they had to do, and there was not really much thought process in it. Today, now that it's principles-based, we are using our actuarial knowledge. We are using our background and our training to think through processes, to be able to talk about what the assumptions are, what the model challenges are, what the investment challenges are, what the liability challenges are, discuss that with management, and be able to come up with a cohesive idea about how to manage the business instead of just how to calculate a number that is going to go into a financial statement.
Sure.
I think actually we're doing a really good job with that, and our professional standards are pushing us in the right direction. We have the Academy of Actuaries puts together an awful lot of material that is trying to help us to get into that right position. So we have governance documents, we have practice notes, we have all kinds of things that are being created to help the actuaries who are doing their jobs. And most of it is really readable for people like me who are not the technical experts. You know, I haven't opened a model, I haven't touched a model since APL, and it's probably at least 30 years ago that I was a modeling actuary. Wasn't really good at it back then, but I can read documents and understand how the process works and be able to talk to the actuaries who are doing the modeling, be able to talk to the actuaries who are the technical experts, and be able to understand and work with them to figure out how all of this stuff fits together and how to put together a cohesive reserve that is going to go into the financial statements, and then be able to explain to management how those results are going to impact their profit stream into the future. How is the company going to look? How should the company manage the business so that consumers are going to have benefits paid when they need them?
Great. Now, you said that every state uses the same valuation manual, but knowing that legislators like to tinker and each state had to pass a law, does that mean the laws are different in different states?
There are slight variations in the laws, and New York is very specifically different. Most of the states passed a very similar law to the standard valuation law. In New York, there is the valuation manuals underlying everything, but Regulation 213 in New York requires additional reserves to be held under certain circumstances, specifically set by the New York Insurance Department. Most of the states are quite similar, but New York does have its own separate set of rules that go along with that.
Sure.
Generally more conservative than the other states.
Okay, interesting. All right. Thank you for listening to Actuary Voices. You can subscribe to this podcast on your preferred listening platform. And now, back to my conversation with Linda Lankowski. Well, let's move on a little bit now, because in addition to drafting the law, the Academy also a few years ago set up what became known as a PBR Bootcamp. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the evolution of that and what kind of bootcamp it is?
So when it looked like the valuation manual became active, so that would have been, we were getting close to 2017. We had a date. We thought it was going to be 2017, that another state would tip us over the edge. We realized that although those of us who'd been working on this process of passing this new model law and putting a valuation manual together, we were in the middle of it. We understood all of this. Most of the actuaries that were not part of the Academy process had less idea of what was going on. In fact, I had several people that talked to me and said, I'll be retired before the valuation manual becomes effective, before we ever get PBR. And it turned out that they did not retire by then. And suddenly they had to learn more about what this principle-based approach really was. So I think it was 2016 that we had our first boot camp. At that time, it was an in-person boot camp, and it was 3 days. I think our first one was at the Chicago airport. And you were kind of stuck at the Chicago airport for 3 days. And it was a boot camp. It was very intense, very discussion. The discussion was, this is how your reserves are going to look. This is the differences that could happen from year to year when you change from net premium reserve to a deterministic to stochastic. This is the weird things that could happen with net premium reserve if you have different features going on. This is how you talk about mortality, and this is how you think about assumptions, asset assumptions and lapse assumptions and all those other things that have to go in. And it was 3 days, very intensive training, talking about how to put together a principle-based reserve. That went over very well. We had requests for another one. We had several of these in-person boot camps, and then COVID hit, and our in-person boot camp became a web-based boot camp. We reached more people than we had otherwise, but it was on video. And we started thinking, okay, I guess this is the way we're going to do it in the future. This year, we're doing instead of a 3-day all intense boot camp, we're doing a series of webinars that will be every Wednesday, or every third Wednesday. A couple of them are off cycle because the asset ones, we wanted to have them close together. So those will be in April, 2 of them in April. But otherwise, we're planning on it being every third Wednesday. And we have topics set up. We have speakers who are going to be presenting, and we'll have other speakers who can give background information if there are questions that come up from it. We hope this will be an interactive webinar, sort of like we were interactive, and you could have that personal touch that we could have in person at an in-person boot camp. We'll see how it goes. This is our first try at this. We expect that we will have quite a lot of people that we will reach, rather than just having one seminar here, one seminar there.
Right. So this series of webinars, is the idea that it begins from soup and goes to nuts, or is it a progression, or are you mixing it up with introductory ones all through the year?
So I would say that the first one is much more of an introductory. It is all about governance and how you're going to report that to your regulators. The next ones are each get into some of the same kind of topics that we would have done in an in-person boot camp. We will talk about assets and how you model your assets, how you choose that. Our first asset discussion is pretty basic. Just, what's the difference between what your asset actually looks like and what you're actually modeling for your PBR process, and how you manage that. And there are prescribed assumptions that go along with assets. Our second asset webinar is going to be more detailed, and it's going to get into more of the discussion that the variable annuity folks have been talking about. Some of it is more along the lines of what's going on with hedging and how are those thoughts and how are the equity implications brought into your general account discussions and all that. It becomes much more complicated. And so we're going to do that one as the second one. Some of our other we're going to talk more about modeling and some of the nuances that go along with modeling, either your SPA or your stochastic models and how you set those up and all that. We haven't got all of the details set out yet, but we're going to do a discussion, which you'd think it would be a basic discussion about combination products, life products that have a long-term care rider or critical illness rider, annuity products that have a long-term care rider. How do the interactions of assumptions change your reserves as it goes along? In some ways, that's a very simple concept, but in other ways, when you're talking about something that might be conservative from a death benefit standpoint and aggressive from a long-term care standpoint, your reserves kind of go in opposite directions depending on how you're setting these up. So there's a lot of discussion that our boot camp will have of how you actually think about that, how you talk to your management, how do you talk to your regulator about how your modeling process has worked along the way and how that gets all put together. So some of the nuances are the fun things that make this boot camp important to people beyond just they go to one boot camp, they never have to do it again. But it's the nuances that you can come in and discuss with other practitioners that make this fun and something that you might want to try a second time.
I see. And your expectation or desire is that people would attend all of the whole series. They would benefit most from that.
I think there is benefit to attending the whole series because it goes through a lot of different topics that all overlap. And so even if you say, oh, I don't need to know about the assets, well, your assets do impact your liabilities, and your asset cash flows and your liability cash flows are tied together. So you probably should be listening to the asset discussion as well as the liability discussions. We're hoping that people will buy the whole series, but it's not necessary. If you really do think that you don't care about assets, then don't come to the asset ones. And because we expect this to be more interactive, and we will have somebody, in many cases me, on the webinar who is monitoring the chat, monitoring questions that are coming in from the audience, we will have that time and be able to make those discussions along the way. So it's not just a lecture format, it will be much more interactive.
Right. And of course, Academy members can dip back to recorded webinars as a member benefit for free after the event if indeed they miss any. So they won't get
Very
the benefit.
Nice.
Yes.
Very nice.
Yes. They won't get the benefit of the interactivity or to be able to ask questions, but they will be able to hear other questions that people asked. Well, finally on PBR, I'm just wondering, you talked a little bit about the nuances that make it more interesting and so on. Do you see any developments? Are there holes in PBR that you think could be filled at some stage in the future? Or
I think there are a lot of things that are still evolving. Right now, on the life side, we had a lot of discussion about YRT reinsurance and how future mortality improvement was part of that. We've only had 1 year of results using future mortality improvement. The regulators haven't even received those reports yet. I think that will be an evolving issue. I think a lot of the things on the variable annuity side have been worked out, but we've this thing called a SPA on the variable annuity side that nobody's quite sure that is it a floor? Is it just a reported item? How is that going to happen? On the fixed annuity side, there's a lot of discussions that are still being worked out because it is fixed annuity. It is a new approach to reserving for, structured settlements and payout annuities and deferred annuities and indexed annuities and all kinds of things. As products change, the valuation manual will change. It's meant to be a living document rather than just a fixed document that lasts forever. I think that there will be need for actuaries to be paying a whole lot more attention to what's going on and how these things are put together, paying more attention to the principles behind reserving rather than a tabular calculation. I think that's good for the profession. I think it's good for the industry. I think we'll have interesting things that go on because we can do things that make sense from a reserve and business standpoint together.
Great. Well, thank you for that introduction to the bootcamp. Further information about this series is available on our website, actuary.org. And obviously, we send emails out to life members with all the details as well. I'd like to move a little bit more generally now about the profession at large, or perhaps the life area, if you prefer. What kind of challenges do you think face the profession at this time, or can you foresee in the future?
I think today the changes that are happening because we're at principles-based reserves, I think there's a lot of confusion about what that means, both among actuaries and among regulators. I think there will be concerns raised on both sides of how these things fit together and how actuaries fit into the process of running the businesses. I think it's a challenge to have to know more about how the business is run in order to create the reserves that you're setting up for your company. I also think that it is a challenge for some of the actuaries who have been used to looking at reviewing tabular reserves, tabular calculations, and now having to review a principle-based calculation. I think those actuaries have not always been talking to each other, and I think it's a good time for us to all start talking to each other and talking back and forth about what things we see that are interesting in the marketplace, what things are we concerned about in the marketplace, how we can work together to manage those things. I think there are a lot of issues that regulators are bringing up that actuaries should have a voice in. Right now, we've got issues related to big data, and actuaries are often using a lot more numbers and have a lot to be that we're saying about big data. I don't think all the actuaries that are talking about big data have the background in big data to be talking about it. I also think that a lot of the regulators who are concerned about big data don't understand the amount of rigor that the actuaries put into understanding the data before it's being used. And so I think there is still quite a disconnect between the actuarial profession and the industry at large in just how important some of these things are and how important it is to have the standards of practice be updated and used by the practicing actuaries to guide their work. I think there's a lot more that's going to happen with that. I think right now we have a new economic scenario generator created by the NAIC. I think there's a lot of discussion that is going on that is going to impact a lot of different companies related to that. I don't understand economic scenario generators, so I'm not going to get into details related to that, but it's fascinating to me to hear how much discussion is back and forth and understanding and misunderstandings there are related to economic scenario generation and what the purpose is and how it's being used. How is capital related to reserving? All of those things that kind of go together and fit together and make actuaries think more like business people rather than technicians. I find that to be very fascinating. I think that the valuation manual is too prescriptive today, and I will forever, for the rest of until I retire, be working to make it less prescriptive and more principle based. So I think that there's more to be said about that. And I know that there are some regulators who are not happy when I say that. But, that's the way it goes. Some of it is just until we all get used to reporting things and understanding what we're reading related to principle-based approaches, it's going to be that way. Prescription is going to be required.
Fair enough. Okay, well, thank you for that insight. Now, I guess it's a converse question now. I'm interested in what you find personally fulfilling about the work you do.
Oh, I like solving problems, and honestly, it's not just solving problems from an actuarial standpoint. I put puzzles together in my free time. I like jigsaw puzzles. I do number puzzles, Sudoku, and crossword puzzles. I like pulling ideas together from different people and making sure that people are heard. So when I am leading a team and trying to get something accomplished, and I'm asking questions from this person and getting answers from this person and trying to pull all the different ideas together into a cohesive whole, to me, that's sort of putting a puzzle together and solving something. And that gives me a really good sense of accomplishment. I'm unlike most actuaries, I'm quite extroverted. And so I have a unique view of how things work and can find that the networking that I do and being able to bring together different ideas has always been very helpful in that respect. I'm not the technical expert. I've never wanted to be a technical expert, but I can still solve those problems because I know who the technical experts are. I can ask the questions. I can pull together numbers that somebody else has got the technical expertise to do the number crunching. And we can all work together and come up with a solution that we're all comfortable with, despite the differences that we have and different approaches. And, this one knows about assets, and this one knows about economic scenario generators, and this one knows about liabilities. And this one's been, working with the marketing guys, and it all comes together in the end as a cohesive whole, and it works, and our clients are going to be happy, and we're going to be paying benefits. We're an industry that is going to be paying benefits for years and years to come. And I'm pretty proud of that.
And rightfully so, rightfully so. You said you like number-based puzzles, and also you said crosswords. Are you a Wordle fan by any chance? You are
I
not?
am.
Oh, you are.
I do enjoy Wordle.
Okay.
And I like the fact that Wordle is once and done for the day, because otherwise I would just keep playing it over and over again in a day.
I agree. It's nice to get it. Well, as long as you solve it. We had one of my colleagues here in the office, she lost her streak of 130 consecutive solutions.
Oh.
So there was some mourning going on the other day in the office. But anyway, what else do you like doing for fun?
Oh, I hike
Uh-huh.
and I walk. So I have a friend that I walk with every morning. During COVID, we used to go to the gym and now we walk. And so we walk 5 or 6 miles every morning. And we are dressed for it. Right now, it's been, in the 20s when we're walking. And so I have a beanie with a light on the top of it. I have vest with reflective gear and all that. And so we're making sure that we are not being hit while we're walking. But we do an awful lot of walking.
That's pretty impressive. 5 or 6 miles a day. I don't quite hit that. But that's great. I wonder, is there any final words you want to share with us? And it's perfectly fine if you don't, but if there's anything you'd like to finish it.
I like being an actuary. I hope everybody who else who is listening to this likes being an actuary as much as I enjoy being an actuary. And for those of you who have questions about how to PBR work or whatever, if you call me, I might not know the answer, but I probably know who would, and I can find a solution for you. So it's one of those things that I like being part of a profession, that we know each other and we're comfortable talking to each other. Everybody seems to be wanting to help each other. I have never run into somebody when I said, can I talk to you about some situation? They say, nope, I am not going to give you an answer. It's really a great profession to be in.
I agree. That's certainly something that struck me in my going on 10 years working at the Academy. So, Linda, I want to thank you very, very much for all the work you do on behalf of the Academy and our members. It's been delightful talking to you today, and I wish you the very best for your bootcamp.
Thank you, David.
You can find out more about principle-based reserving and the PBR Webinar Bootcamp series at our website, actuary.org. You are listening to Actuary Voices, the podcast series from the American Academy of Actuaries. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on your preferred listening platform.